If you are starting a vertical farm and don't know where to begin or which technology would suit your needs, then reach out to the experts at Cultivated. As indoor farm brokers, they help connect you to the right technology and ensure your project is successful. Best of all, their service is free because they work on behalf of their partners. Visit cultivated.com to learn more. And that's spelled cultivated.com, or click the link in the show notes.
So I think that we're going to be a game changer in the vertical farming space. And I say that for a couple of reasons. So yes, you've got your what I call industrial size guys in vertical farming, both as well as the venture capitalist money, where they're putting it in vertical farming. It's all these, kind of behemoth implementations, right?
Welcome to the Vertical Farming Podcast, weekly conversations with fascinating CEOs, founders, and agtech visionaries. Join us every week as we dive deep into the world of vertical farming with your host, Harry Duran.
Vertical Farming Podcast, Season 4, welcome back. If this is your first time listening, yes, you're in the right place in case you were lost somewhere in the podosphere. It's the one where we interview fascinating CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming companies from around the world. I'm your host, Harry Duran. Last week we had a special episode, round 2, with co-founder and managing director at Cultivated, Eric Levesque. Regular listeners are no strangers to the great team at Cultivated. It was great to get an update on their recent Series A $3 million round and some of the new projects they had in the works. And it's always fun to hear what's happening in their world as they're connected to so many interesting projects that are getting off the ground. This week, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dandridge Melton, the CEO of Vertical Growth Farming Systems. It's an organization that's seeking to change the way that the world approaches hunger, malnutrition, natural disasters, and the effects traditional farming has on our environment through their unique container farms. And in this episode, we discuss the vertical farming landscape, competitors to their system, and how Dandridge's entrepreneurial spirit has contributed to his success in this immensely important field. We talk about the future of farming and why education is critical, if we as a planet are going to be able to adapt to agricultural challenges we're soon facing. Dandridge shares his profound belief in the project and talks more about his mission to change the way the world feeds itself. Really love hearing stories of entrepreneurs, as I am one myself, and this is really an inspiring conversation. I know you'll like it. Excited to be partnering once again with Indoor AgCon. Whether you're starting up or scaling up, Indoor AgCon can help you grow your vertical farming business. This year, the premier trade show and conference for vertical farming and controlled environment agriculture heads to Caesars Forum, Las Vegas. I'm tempted to do an Elvis impersonation, but I'll hold off on that. It's going to be February 28th through March 1st this year to co-locate with the National Growers Association show. You can explore an expo floor filled with new product resources and business solutions, attend educational sessions by the top CEOs and thought leaders, and connect with peers, grocers, and other potential new business partners at great networking events. And it's looking like I'll actually be there myself, so be on the lookout for me. I'll see if I can get some t-shirts made for the podcast to make it easy. And I'll also be looking to connect with some previous hosts. You can save an additional 25% off registration with our new promo code VFPOD22. That's VFPOD22. And you can learn more about the conference at indoor.ag. As always, ratings and reviews can be left at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. I'd love to read yours out next. All right, without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Dandridge. So, Dandridge Melton, founder of Vertical Growth Farming Systems. Thank you for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So where's home for you?
I'm currently located in San Luis Obispo, California.
Okay.
So we're on the Central Coast, halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Been here 21 years. Getting ready to move on the 15th of April, moving to Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Wow. What's the impetus for that move?
So I connected with a economic development group there called Upstate Alliance.
Okay.
And we're going to start manufacturing there this time next year. And so they have a lot of tax incentives, grant monies for small to medium-sized manufacturers like myself. So California has just become extremely difficult to start and run a small business.
Yeah, I'm in Minneapolis now. I've been a bit nomadic. I grew up in New York, so I'm very familiar with the East Coast. Left in 2014 and lived in LA for 4 years, so I'm also familiar with
Okay.
LA and that part of the country. Yeah, it's been challenging to see what's been happening there with everything related to the pandemic and the weather and the wildfires, and it's just been, and you could probably speak to that better, how crazy it's been.
Yeah, I mean, I moved here with so this is my fifth startup, fourth as a founder. And the one where I wasn't the founder I was employee number 2 with a high-tech startup in Prescott, Arizona. And we moved here to St. Louis because of Cal Poly. We were a hardware and software developer, and Cal Poly is just a great engineering school. And our engineer was a Cal Poly alum, so we wanted to tap into that resource. That's what brought me to California. I'm originally born and raised in Northern Virginia, just outside of the DC Beltway.
Okay.
And yeah, it's like I said, this being my fifth startup, I've started a couple businesses here. California is, just uber expensive, pretty much on every level, just even, daily living, cost of milk. I think I paid $4.89 for a gallon of gas yesterday.
Wow.
And again, just, as a small business person and, having limited resources, it's tough to start and grow a business in California. The permitting, the cost, and yeah, outside of that, I mean, here, Highway 1, they just had some more rock slides. We got a lot of rain the last couple of weeks, and of course the wildfires. It's a great spot here on the Central Coast. I mean, we're in some pretty nice wine country.
Yeah.
The weather's typically always amazing. But my wife, and again, being from the East Coast, I have 4 siblings. My parents are kind of sprinkled from DC to Miami. So
okay,
we're looking forward to the moves, the four seasons,
yeah,
and having our dollar go much further than it can here in California.
It's interesting, the 4 seasons, because I'm now in the Midwest, and I never imagined I'd be here, but that's what love does to you sometimes.
Yeah, love does make you do crazy things, right?
Yeah, and so we went up north for New Year's. My partner's parents have a cabin up there, and just about an hour and a half or 2 hours north. And he's like, "You guys know it's minus 25 right now."
Oh man!
It's like, well, we're gonna be in the cabin, and it's only one day, and then it warms up. It gets to -5. So
right, yeah, exactly. Keep the fire going and bring your long johns.
And I did do snowshoe for the first time ever, so that was fun.
Oh, how was it?
It was cool. Well, they're modern, because I think I'm 51, so I'm like old school, and
Okay.
When I think of snowshoes, I think of like these wooden things, like Swiss Family Robinson.
Totally. It wasn't that way at all?
No, they're fiberglass now. They're really light.
Probably not as big either, are they? Or
no, not as big either, and easy to use. And then the heel is not connected to the bottom, so when you're walking, you're sort of like
more natural.
Yeah, it's more natural walking. It takes a little bit of used to, but then you can go in deep snow and not sink all the way in, which is fun. And I think with everything else, it's just, you spoke about the 4 seasons. I think there is something inherent about sort of like the birth and rebirth cycles, and just experiencing the cold and knowing that that's short-lived. And I did get spoiled being out in LA for 4 years. Just like, it would get to 55 and I'm like, oh, it's chilly.
No, totally that. I feel you on that, Harry. Just that kind of rebirthing, it's just kind of, the seasons. I mean, there's a reason we have seasons.
Yes.
And, it's amazing summer here, like, 360 days of the year. And of course, we were thankful for all the rain we got the last few weeks, but, we're still in a drought. We need so much more water to fall. There's not a lot of rain on the forecast. And this is our rainy season right now. So, just hoping, praying for more rain.
Yeah, it feels like that's always the conversation. I just remember like living there, and you take it for granted growing up on the East Coast that just rain is normal. Like it just rains every now and then when you get there and you're like, it hasn't rained in like 3 months. It's crazy.
Right.
And you get one day for like 2 hours and you're like, everyone's tweeting about it. And it's extreme weather in California because people go on social media.
Yeah, that's the only rain you got to get for the next 3 months.
Yeah. Or an earthquake too. I experienced a sustained tremor, which was like really interesting. if you've never been through one as well. So
Yeah, I've been through a couple now that I've been here. Yeah, unless you've lived through one, it's one of those experiences like you can't really, verbally tell someone like the experience until you've actually, lived through one. And then it's like, holy mackerel. That's, we certainly didn't get those in Fairfax, Virginia growing up.
it's a weird, you're right, because you cannot explain what it's like to be sleeping in bed and just have the floor start shaking and realize that you can't do anything about it. You just have to like hope. We're just wondering like, how long is this going to last? And I think it was maybe 20 to 30 seconds. It's just a long time.
Yeah. Oh, it is. I think the
Yeah.
first one I experienced was 2000. I was down in Costa Mesa with our engineer, and I was sleeping at his folks' house. It was probably, 1 or 2 in the morning, and I woke up to that whole thing. Bed was shaking. The artwork was kind of doing the back and forth.
Wow.
And yeah, then, what do? Do you stand in the doorway? Do you
Yeah.
go for an interior room? I actually stood in the doorway, and then I went to the front door, which is like apparently a no-no, right? You're putting yourself at risk kind of doing those things. But yeah, it's just a phenomenon that unless you kind of witness it yourself, it's hard to describe.
Yeah. So when did you first get the entrepreneurial bug?
So my first go at being an entrepreneur was 1993. I was playing professional basketball in the south of France
Oh, wow.
for a couple of years and came back in the spring of 93. And my girlfriend at the time, her brother was a successful studio drummer there in Phoenix. And it's about the same time the Spin Doctors, if you remember that band.
Yep.
I'm 59, so we're not too far apart in age.
Yeah.
So the Spin Doctors had come out of Tempe, so there's a pretty nice music scene going on. And he said, hey, I got a great idea for a business. It's a place for bands to practice.
Okay.
And he took me to where bands were currently paying to practice. And I said, well, I can do better than what's currently being done. And I started with a 15,000 square foot building. And when I sold it, I had over 262 bands
Wow.
practicing there. I had I was there 2 weeks, and the band Megadeth showed up, and they paid my rent for the first 6 months.
Oh, that's awesome.
I should have asked them for twice as much. And then Dionne Warwick
Oh, that's nice.
and UB40
Oh, cool.
practice at my spot.
Very cool.
And then mostly, they were all, for the most part, just local, guys that had a day job that, want, the aspiring professional musician. So that was my first go at that, at being an entrepreneur. And then I hooked up with this startup company in Prescott, northern Arizona, and that's what moved me here. So that was my second. I was employee number 2.
That was Slow Veg, right?
No, that was my third go. My third
Okay.
go. So the high tech startup was super successful. We won Best of Show at what's now called the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, the CES.
CES, yeah.
We won Best of Show.
Wow.
We had some RFID, some asset tracking software, hardware. And then I watched, we went through about 5 CEOs and about $30 million in a couple of years, and just watched them pile drive the company in the ground.
Wow.
I learned a lot, but it was extremely disappointing. We had a lot of promise with our technology, but just couldn't get the right people at the leadership positions to move us forward. So, and then 2009, of course, we all remember the economy. 2009, I got the idea here in San Luis to start a home delivered, locally grown produce company, a CSA, and started that with 28 customers and sold it with almost 3,000 back in 2016.
What was happening in your life? Like how did you even get the idea for that?
So the truth about that idea, my mother had passed away in 2005 there on the East Coast. So I went back and was living in the town where I went to high school, close to my dad. And so I came back here to San Luis Obispo in 2008. So there was about a 2.5 year break when I left SLO, moved back to the East Coast, came back. And so this is 2008. The economy's starting to tank. I went to 22 job interviews. I didn't get a single offer.
Wow.
I was either, kind of that quandary, too expensive for the economy, or they knew I was going to take a, $50 an hour job and I was going to leave as soon as, there was something better. So I didn't get a single offer. And I was watching TV at my house one night. I'd probably been back here about a month, and there was a show on TV, How I Made My First Million.
Okay.
And they had, half of the show is about this scientist, the guy that invented the super soaker, yeah. Right? The big squirt gun.
Yeah.
And so I watched that. And then the second half of that show was about this husband and wife who had started a company in the Bay Area called Planet Organics.
Okay.
And they had started 13 years prior. They had one van, 8 pieces of local produce, certified organic produce. And so the show was 13 years later. They had 48 vans, did almost 30 million in gross sales. And then in that show, they asked the husband and wife, the founders, like, who is your customer? What is the demographic? And they said, well, they're health conscious, they're environmentally conscious, they understand sustaining local economies. And I looked at my girlfriend and I said, man, that's exactly the person that lives here in San Luis Obispo. They, checked all those boxes. And so I literally got up the next morning, called one of my basketball buddies who is the assistant dean at the School of Agriculture here at Cal Poly. And I said, hey, I got this crazy idea about a home delivered produce company. And he hooked me up with the School of Ag, and some seniors did a feasibility study. And I literally took about the next 9 months and wrote a business plan, learned about, pricing in the ag industry, and then launched, like I said, June 15th of 2009 with 28 customers. And, again, the economy was, tanking. And it just took off. It was amazing. Like I said, I sold it back in July of 2016. So 7 years later with almost 3,000 customers.
That's a nice story. What I love is sometimes how the threads of connections, you don't necessarily understand them when they're happening. And you mentioned one of your teammates from the basketball team ended up being the person that you reached out to when you had a question about it, because he happened to be in a position that would be helpful. And I don't think you'd ever imagined when you went to go play basketball there that you'd be building relationships that, would be beneficial and be helpful for you sometime in the future.
Yeah. I mean, it's, so I have learned this about, the pickup, playing hoops in the pickup gym, right? It's like every genre of occupation is represented, right? You got your brain surgeon, you got your HVAC guy, you've got your lawyer, your plumber, your, restaurant owner, barber. And so, over time, to your point, it's, you just never know when those relationships are going to kind of manifest into something you never even thought about. And, thankful that, of course, just playing pickup, we're just playing for fun. So those relationships are typically healthy.
Yeah, it's sort of like the court is the great equalizer.
It is, in fact, right?
Yeah. So, what did you do after then? Did you kind of sit, after you exited that, did you sit and try to figure out what your next move was going to be, or did you have something in mind already?
Well, I had nothing. Well, I had, so when I sold it, I actually, in that sale agreement, I partitioned off the North County of San Luis Obispo, Paso Robles, kind of this other half. And I was going to just replicate my business model up there, use the same farmers, same demographic.
Okay.
And then I ran into, again, one of my other basketball friends who's actually a HVAC contractor here. And that actually we ran into each other the day I came to an agreement with the buyer of my CSA. So I worked for him for a while, kind of in an interim capacity, kind of till I figured out what my next step was. And in that moment, a builder here on the coast came up to me and said, hey, we're not really digging your boss, but we like you, Dan. And across the street over there, next year, we're going to build 125 more houses. And we would like you to be our HVAC contractor. And I said, well, I know nothing really about the industry. Can I get a license? How does the math play out if I were to do that? And so it took me about 2 weeks to figure out I probably should have been an HVAC contractor my whole life because the money is exceptional.
Really? And,
I met the criteria for my California HVAC contractor's license, took the test, did all, submitted all the proper, required paperwork and got my HVAC license here in the state, and then partnered with that builder and did, I don't know, roughly about 325 all new homes, new construction. And about a year into it, I realized though I really enjoyed the cash, I wasn't having any fun doing it. It was, like Model 1 is Model 1 for the whole subdivision.
Yeah.
Right. So the parts are the same.
Very cookie cutter.
Right. Totally cookie cutter. And I just got bored with it. And then at that point, I knew just within myself, I needed to start looking for something else. And I had gotten the idea about this vertical farm about 4 years ago. And so I met my contractual obligations with the builder and said, hey, I'm going to move in a different direction. And so, this month makes 2 years I've been working on this current endeavor, my fifth startup.
Do you remember when vertical farming came on your radar?
I do. It was, again, back when I started my home delivered produce company here, I had one of my customers come up to me, and she was actually a rep for a product called the Tower Garden, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So it's kind of it's about a half of a wine barrel made out of plastic. That's the reservoir. Has about a 4-inch or 4-foot tall tower that can grow about 30 plants in that tower. And, has a fish pump that kind of percolates the liquid nutrients on top of that, and they kind of trickle down on the roots, and it's great for, kind of a back patio or back balcony. And she wanted me to sell it to my customers there at Slow Veg. And I said, absolutely. I mean, this is amazing. How much is that? She's like, well, this is our base model, and it's $499. And I looked at it and thought to myself, well, that's about $40 worth of plastic and a fish pump. And $499 just seems a little over the top. So I immediately pivoted and said, hey, how about if I become a distributor?
Smart.
She said, well, then your cost is like $299. So then I was still going, man, that just seems super expensive. But that was my introduction to vertical farming. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what you could grow I knew zero about it. Since that moment, 2009, even through today, I'm still tracking the development industry of vertical farming. And then again, about 4 years ago, I just the light bulb went off in my head, and it's like, man, as you well know, it's, in shipping containers, it's a controlled environment, or it's repurposed warehouses and urban environments, which are all magnificent, but they have some limitations, right? The that control environment just mandates a substantial energy requirement to manage the heating, cooling, lighting, hydroponic components. I mean, it's on the grid. And so I got the idea, like, man, why can't we just kind of take the, solar, hydroponic, vertical, and kind of put those parts and pieces together in a really dummied down fashion, to get to the guy that, lives somewhere that's not getting good food, but isn't close to this urban environment or close to the grid.
Yeah. And did any of the experience in HVAC help in terms of like on the mechanical side? I'm just curious about that.
No, so I actually am currently still part of, so Cal Poly, again, they have what they call a hothouse and incubator program for, aspiring entrepreneurs. But in parallel to that, it's supported by the Small Business Association called the Small Business Development Center. So that runs in parallel to the incubator hothouse. I applied for that January last year, got accepted. And so I get all those Cal Poly resources for free.
Oh, wow.
And so last school year, I had 7 seniors and 3 PhDs helping. I had 5 industrial technology students.
Wow.
Plus the department chair and another PhD. So they've given me like 40 pages of white paper to tell me exactly how this production, we're going to come in the front left corner of a warehouse, and it's going to be just a blank 20-foot shipping container, and it's going to move around the interior perimeter, and it's going to come out the other front corner, ready to ship. And so, that information would have, if I had hired an engineering firm, would cost me, $100,000. I got it for free. The kids got a great experience, putting it together. And then I had 2 more students kind of on the entrepreneurial, on the business side of Cal Poly that did my websites, started going down the path with kind of that social media. I am of the age, as I said, 59, where, those social platforms, Instagram, TikTok, how often do you do it? When do you do it? I missed all that, right? That came after my kind of professional life. So those students were invaluable in helping me understand how the messaging needs to happen once I kind of start rolling this out.
So I think some of the questions folks might have that are familiar with the space, it runs a gamut, as you've alluded to, and we've had folks here from freight farms, who do focus on the shipping containers, which I'm sure you've are familiar with them, and then obviously to the Boweries, the Plenties, the Aero Farms, the mega large operations. So part of what is important, I think, is educating folks as to the different options, and that's why our platinum sponsor Cultivate has been really helpful as a entry point for people who are interested. They kind of see where their interest lies, and then they direct them to the appropriate project, and then it's free to them because the partner pays Cultivated. So that's how they make their money, and they're able to serve more people. So we always talk about on the show about the education process. And so as you yourself are getting educated in opportunities and how you want to sell this and what would be a good market for this farm, how do you distinguish what vertical growth farming currently offers?
So I think that we're going to be a game changer in the vertical farming space. And I say that for a couple of reasons. So yes, you've got your what I call industrial size guys in vertical farming, both as well as the venture capitalist money, where they're putting it in vertical farming.
Yeah.
It's all these, kind of behemoth implementations, right? And I've watched freight farms, for the last 11 years, and they're amazing. Their product's amazing. They definitely, they're on whatever the radiation of, the next rev of their product. So they're just bigger, better, stronger than they were when they started. But again, they are handcuffed to the power grid, and they require a lot of power because they are climate controlled environments. And Mother Nature, as we all know, she's a beast. She's going to hunt down agricultural efforts, even in controlled environments, and, try to make mold happen, or, she's just going to try to beat you up at every turn. Yeah. And so what differentiates us from, well, certainly we're not of that size and scope. So I would say who I consider indirect competitors are only 2 companies today. One's called Farm From a Box. They're based out of the Bay Area. So they have a 20-foot shipping container. You get 2 acres of drip irrigation. So you get about 80,000 feet of drip irrigation. They're totally off the grid. You got to have a fresh water source to kind of hook up to. And then they have a cold storage so you can, inside the container, so you can take the output of those 2 acres and give it some shelf life. So I met with the principals a couple of years ago when I just started down this path with my project, and they were very forthcoming. They're like, hey, we lost sales because the potential customer, the soil wasn't any good. And just because you give it water doesn't mean you get to grow things, right? So they lost sales. And then they had some sales that took more than 3 years to totally, beginning to getting a check cut to them, because those customers did want to amend the soil. And then that takes, 2 or 3 years to amend soil to then put it on and start farming. So they've done very well. I think they're 7 years old this year, 7 or 8 years old. I think they're, millions in sales. So they're doing well, but they are handcuffed by the soil. So I've taken, ours is soil-less, no soil. So that's out of the equation. And then the other, who I just found last summer, was Farm in a Pod. They're currently based out of St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, and they actually are an aquaponic vertical farm. And so they're, like us, you got to have fresh water source. But once you land their 20-foot container, they give you, on the inside, they kind of give you the parts and pieces to build a greenhouse on top of that container. That's where the vertical tubes are all hanging.
Okay.
And then interior below is where the aquaponics fish are. And I spoke to the principal there as well in August, and I was looking at his website, kind of checking him out before I called. They've gotten a prototype. They're not in production yet. They're on St. Croix because they know they need to be next to a port to get it, to ship it. And I started looking at that, and I was like, okay, so what happens when the fish die? Because they got a shelf life, okay? And then what happens when you harvest the crop? Like, how do you reload it? Well, we have a grow room in our shipping container, so we can go from seed to seedling, and we have a walk-in cooler, and it's all driven by solar, so we're completely off the grid. And so, I've been talking to the Future Farmers of America, so we're going to roll out 3 pilot programs this year. Here in the next 6 months, we're going to do one at my Future Farmers of America chapter at my old high school.
That's talk about coming full circle.
Right, exactly. Because kids need to understand. So there's some say that by 2030, we're going to be the earth is going to be completely out of topsoil.
Wow.
And some say it could be 2050. So even if you go 2050, we're out of topsoil. That's why regenerative farming is really picking up, because we've learned that disking and just destroying that ecosystem, that first 6 inches is problematic to the health of the soil. But ours, if I sell my product to the FFA chapter in Chicago, for example, come November 1st, 2 kids can disassemble it within an hour, shove it all back in the shipping container, lock the doors, put a lock on it, and then come April 1st in Chicago, open it back up, set it back up, start growing again. And then, of course, you can take the output of the farm. So our particular design produces 1,700 super nutritious plants every 60 days if you could grow year round. And so then you can take that output, if you're an FFA chapter, put it back into your food costs for the cafeteria, and it's, uber nutritious. Or you could say to those kids, hey, go sell those 1,700 heads of lettuce in your neighborhood, and we can raise, $1,700 to go to the national convention. They can do it however they want. So those things really differentiate us from even those 2 kind of, closely related competitors.
And when you said that, what I immediately thought of was being asked to sell chocolate bars when I was
right
in grade school, and now it's heads of lettuce.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was on the tennis team, I was in band, I was on the debate team in high school. I was kind of that geek. And of course, all of those, if you're not like football, if you're not a major sport in a high school, you got to come up with your own funding. And I'm sure that's probably true today to some extent.
So how important was it you talked about the ability for the two students to tear it down and lock it up for the season. And you talked about the ability to work with the high school. Looking forward, and this is some of the conversations we've had on the show, but how important do you think it is, the education aspect of like educating, involving the community, having them, self-sustainability, this idea of like growing crops to fund, projects, how do you think about those things going forward?
Well, I think they're paramount, actually. I mean, you can't move forward without a good foundation of education. And we're running out of, the population continues to grow. We are losing farmable land. So this, again, just in a worldwide kind of scope, right? We're growing in population, we're losing farmable land. And so those are diametrically opposed to each other. So how do we, what's a viable solution? Well, you're running out of space, you're running out of good soil. Vertical farming's got to just continue. Whatever it is today, it's going to be more important tomorrow. I firmly believe that. And so that youth coming up are going to have to understand, the engineering, the science, the methodology. So that's kind of my segue into the FFA is we're going to do this pilot, and I'm going to go to the DC, talk to the national, organization and go, hey, you have 8,600 chapters sprinkled around the U.S. Of course, for myself, I would like to sell them 8,600 units.
Yeah.
But at least let's get it out there. And some of the kind of the darker aspects of what I've learned. So, for example, pre-pandemic, there was roughly 690 million people going to bed hungry every night. Now that number's 820.
Wow.
Of that 820, roughly 40 million are right here in the US of A. Of that 40 million, 13 million are kids to mostly single mothers. One of our other pilots, we're talking to the Navajo Nation because unfortunately, it's not in any history books that I ever read growing up, but, we took the best land because that's where the Native American was habitating and said, hey, go to northern Arizona where there's no water and there's no soil and you guys live here. Well, believe it or not, there are communities within the Navajo Nation today that don't have access to fresh water. Now that makes me mad, right?
Yeah.
And so you say, hey, if you had, here's how the math works with our system. If you had 8 of those shipping containers, 8 by 20, if you had 8 of them, we can feed a family of 100 for a year with healthy calories. So
what kind of crops are you growing?
So we're growing super nutritious leafy greens, right? We got the rainbow shards, the mustard greens. In Africa, outside of the U.S., a lot of the world eats dandelion because it's like kale on steroids, right?
Super healthy, yeah.
Well, what did we do here in the U.S.? We made a weed killer for it, right? So
wild,
not that smart, but so that's why I've been engaging. Part of this 2-year run I'm on is talking to like the World Food Program, Action Against Hunger, Feed America, because they're the ones that are going to purchase our product and deploy to, those underserved communities throughout the world. But we have them right here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so, your urban planners, your city planners, community gardens. Now, when city planners, urban planners are like mapping out growth, they are in fact putting gardens on the map. And so it's like, hey, drop one of these in here. And then you can, an inherent attribute to our system is who's ever kind of the steward or the farmer of the system can now become an entrepreneur. If I were to tell someone in Kenya, okay, we're going to teach you, educate you, service and support you, and and you're going to grow 1,700 heads of lettuce every 60 days. You only need so much for your family. So what are you going to do with the other output? Well, you're going to barter, trade, sell, and you're going to raise your own economy by participating in, the farming of our system.
I think what's important also is it's a long game, and I think people need to realize that, because part of what you mentioned is the education process, and also weaning people off these habits they have because they've been given access to cheap food, cheap junk food, fast food. And there's part of that is going to be, maybe it's a new generation, but just teaching people healthy eating habits, because you could have the farm on site, you could have it at a competitive price, and you could make sure that they know that they have access to it, and then but they also have to believe that that's something that they want. And so it's an interesting challenge that the industry is going to have, because I think there's no shortage of projects that are going to make this more accessible. It is education. You do have to teach people how, the entrepreneurs in that cohort are going to have to understand how to manage this, run a successful business, not go broke, not lose money, and also how to market it. And so there's so many moving parts, but I think the education of not only the people running these, but also the, making it sexy, I guess, making produce sexy. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's a challenge in and of itself, but I think you're right. And I think, if you look just, for example, like how the non-meat, the vegan industry, right? It's accelerating right now. I mean, KFC's, is coming out with, meatless chicken, right? So I think societally, we are starting to realize, like, the gut buster Mountain Dew every day is going to lead to diabetes.
Yeah.
It's going to lead to poor health. Let's not, but again, that comes at an early age, right? That you got to teach kids, like, hey, instead of, grabbing for a Coke, you need to be grabbing for just a good old glass of water. Yeah. And if you want to eat something, eat a piece of fruit and not a Snickers bar. So I think that's happening at it's a low rumble right now, right? It's percolating, but it's going to be key to, as we move forward, for kids to understand, like, hey, you can't just go plant some more food. You just can't. That's not an actual remedy to, feeding. And so, what are the remedies? Well, vertical farming. And if you live in a city and not far away from one of those behemoth converted warehouses, if you're kind of out in the woods in Kentucky, for that family, how are you going to feed your kids healthy every night? How's that going to happen?
Yeah, it reminds me of the challenge when people talk about broadband access to everyone, fiber optics. There's always like that question about the last mile, like how do you get into the household? And it feels like there's something similar here. Like, to your point, it's helpful to have the awareness of having the big box, vertical farms, but they're likely making partnerships with supermarkets who traditionally have not been in these areas. And so how do you, there is a hybrid solution here where you educate people and make it accessible. And I think the more people in the community see, like, a family member or see a neighbor, express an interest in them or purchase a vertical farm, it's just like the curiosity effect. I think building up curiosity around what's happening in this industry I think is really helpful. And a younger generation, I think, sees vertical farming as something cool. Like, when I lived in New York, it used to be cool to have like a chicken coop in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or on your roof, and that was like something the hipsters did. But now it's like, maybe it's a vertical farm or maybe it's something similar. And I think with the sort of, we got awoken up, the past 2 years with the pandemic and the importance of this. And I think people are aware, it's top of mind, and they are looking for alternative solutions. So, I keep harping on this on every episode, but the more people are talking about this, the more there's different opportunities available. And I think what you're doing and the partnerships and alliances you've built with some of these organizations, with the university, and thinking bigger about going to DC and having those conversations, I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I am, to be totally forthcoming. It's been, when you talk to any philanthropic group like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? There's a reason there's not a phone number on their website. It's kind of the same with the World Health organization and action against hunger. I mean, they're just a huge bureaucratic machine. And so, I continue to work myself up the food chain, if you will, to the guy that's going to, take a hard look at our product, try to understand, the methodology, how to implement, and those relationships take time. And so we're really hoping, with these 3 pilots, we're going to get some great intel. We're going to have one in Phoenix, Arizona to kind of mimic sub-Sahara Africa. So, are we watering those 1,700 plants, 8 times a day or 15 times a day because it's 110 for 60 days in a row? And then what plastic parts are problematic? And, so we're going to get some good intel from, having those being deployed. And then, hopefully, like I said, this time next year, start, actually producing them and kind of getting them out and rolling into the communities, here and afar.
That's going to be exciting. A couple of questions as we wrap up. What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently? So
we have just started down the path of fundraising.
Okay.
I've done all my appropriate SEC, state and federal filings, to engage investors. So I'm definitely a compliance-driven person. I didn't want to get the cart before the horse. And so for my potential investors here, and I've got about 30 guys here in San Luis that are, some percentage are going to help me with this endeavor. And so the biggest question has been, do you have a working prototype? Guys want to kick the tires. Hey, I'll give you some money, Dan. Show me it working. So I totally get that. And that's really been and we've just gotten to that. So, next week I'm going to take 15 guys on a Wednesday and do my show and tell, if you will, there at the working prototype here in San Luis. And then 15 more guys on Thursday, because the only component today that I can't buy off the shelf is the actual grow tube. And the reason for that is because they're going to be sitting out, in the sub-Sahara sun. So they have to be food grade, and they also have to be UV resilient, right?
Yeah.
And so that I can't buy today off the open market. So, and to buy the tool to make the tube is about 80 grand. But once I buy the tool, I own the tool.
Yeah.
So really the hardest part has been, the hardest one's been from my wife. Like, hey, when are you going to make some money?
Yeah.
Because I've been, self-funding for 2 years now. So thankful for her and her support for sure. And then the other one's like, hey, when are you going to have a working prototype? You gotta show us, you can look at this amazing little 45-second video I have of the kind of the system, which looks great and is very, telling in the 45 seconds. But, again, it doesn't prove to a potential investor that, hey, this is a viable product. So,
yeah, I think having them on the ground and kicking the tires and, working with what you have and being able to touch it, I think is really puts the real use case in front of their eyes, and they can see the application of it, and then having you describe how it's going to work. So maybe just related to that, since you have the stage, is there an ask of this audience that you have?
Well, so I would first just steer them towards my website, which is verticalgrowth.farm, and just see, what we're trying to get to. And then, yes, I mean, you can reach out to me if there's any interest in investing. I have my website, has my email address on there. Please feel free. We really feel we've got a game changer because, first of all, those 2 other kind of competitive products, they start about 72,000, and kind of, if you add kind of the bells and whistles, it starts creeping up, just like freight farms. You can get the basic model, like you buy a car, right?
Yeah.
Our model is going to be right about 40 grand.
Okay.
And so, we're excited about the price point, entry into the market. And, my thanks to you is, I'm kind of in that, hey, let's start putting it out to the world and kind of see what we feedback we get back. from our efforts. So, and today, the most important thing is, funding. You can, everything needs funding.
Yeah. And the good thing is that even with the visibility of the bigger names coming in, the VC money coming in, it still like creates that buzz so that other investors who are not at that level, and maybe speaking to some of the folks that you have locally, I think they see it. They probably not ready to play at that space, but they know someone personally that's doing something. So they're like, well, the market is validating that there's a lot of movement here in a positive direction, I think. So that sort of, I would think, helps your case as well, because they're like, okay, tangentially they see, okay, this is part of that way, and I want to, get in on the ground level, and this might be a good opportunity.
No, I think it is just that. So we've taken on some investors. We just started taking on investors about 3 weeks ago, and they're personal friends. I've known them 21 years. They're all local people. And they're, so I've got 5 investors. 3 of them are just really into it for the purpose of it, right? So that's your social impact investor. They're not really they want a return, but they're doing it because they know the world needs help, and this can help the world.
Yeah.
And then you have, a couple of them are like, yeah, this is pretty amazing. And there's a lot of money in the space to be made, and you're early into the space. We want to kind of ride those coattails. And I think both are equally, valid, of course, but we're definitely going to be more of the social impact investor. We're going to, if you look at our financial projections, we're at about 80 million 7 years from now. Again, at 59, I'm going to exit. We think we can take that, the stock today is being offered at 80 cents. I think 7 years, it could be $8 to $10. Of course, that's all speculation, right? That's the truth of it. But I think a majority of our investors are going to be that social impact, like, hey, this is really a good thing, and it's going to do a lot of good. How can I help support it?
Yeah. Well, Dana, for the listeners' benefit, we connected on originally LinkedIn, right?
It was.
So thanks for making that outreach. And there's so much happening in the space. As much as I'd like to think I'm on top of everything that's happening, I love like just one-off emails from folks that are doing interesting things. And so I'm glad you were persistent in sharing what you have working on. And I think it's that entrepreneurial spirit that you have, that you just, you got to do whatever it takes to get the word out when you're self-funded and you're bootstrapped, which I can definitely relate to as an entrepreneur myself. So
yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you how I found you on LinkedIn. I literally Googled, like, who's the lead podcaster in vertical farming? And Harry Duran. It's like, okay, yeah. Who is this guy? Start hunting him down. And I certainly appreciate, your efforts on my behalf. It's life's a journey, and, we're all interconnected. So, if you're not doing good, I'm probably not going to do good either. So yeah. I really believe in that.
Yeah, there is a rising tide lifts all boats aspect to this, which I think is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So verticalgrowth.farm.
Yep.
.farm, which is a great URL, by the way. So congratulations on snagging that. That's a nice one. And so we'll have links. Obviously, any resources that were mentioned here, we'll pull them together in the show notes as well. And the contact information to reach out to you is on the site as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing your story and your entrepreneurial journey and everything you're doing for the vertical farming community. I think it's really inspiring and hopefully gets other folks inspired to understand that you don't need a tremendous investment, and there's room for you if you're just looking to get your feet wet, just get started. And I think this would be a good resource to check out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks again for your time, Dan.
Thanks, Harry, and Happy New Year to you and yours. Wish you, all the health, right? Stay healthy. And enjoy the Midwest as much as one can.
I will.
Take care.
Thanks again to Dandridge for coming on the show and sharing his story. As always, full show notes available at verticalfarmingpodcast.com. Thanks to our Season 4 title sponsor, Cultivated. If you're looking for a vertical farm and don't know where to start or which technology would suit your needs, reach out to them today. Best of all, their service is free because they work on behalf of their partners. Learn more at cultivated.com, and that's spelled cultivatd.com. Just leave out the last E. Don't forget to sign up for the Indoor AgCon conference at indoor.ag. Save an additional 25% off registration with our promo code VFPOD22. Podcast production and marketing provided by Fullcast. Sign up for a free chat at fullcast.co. And as a reminder, if you're enjoying this show, please leave us a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. We'll be sure to read those out on future episodes. Until we meet again, here's to your health.
Thanks for listening. To read the full show notes for this episode, which includes any links mentioned in the episode, as well as a full show transcription, visit verticalfarmingpodcast.com. There, you can sign up for our email list to be notified when new episodes are published.